used to think my wife's Thursday trips to the bank were nothing more than a quiet habit, a small ritual she kept for herself. But after she passed, our son stormed into her room as if he owned every inch of it, demanding answers I didn't even know existed. And when I uncovered the truth behind those 40 years of Thursdays, everything I believed about my family shifted. Tell me, has a secret ever changed the way you see someone you love? I stood by her grave long after everyone else drifted toward their cars. The rain came in quiet threads, the kind that settles on your shoulders without asking permission. I didn't move. My hands rested on the cane I rarely used, and for a moment I wondered how many Thursdays she had stood somewhere alone, the way I was standing now. People talk about grief as if it announces itself, but sometimes it slips in like a draft under the door. I felt it in the way my chest tightened when the groundskeeper nodded at me, waiting to lock up. I whispered my goodbye, not sure if the words even carried. The drive back to our house in southwest Atlanta felt heavier than usual. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't open a window. I just let the silence settle around me. That silence followed me inside, the kind that lands on the furniture, lingers in the hall, then waits for you at the foot of the stairs. I went to our bedroom without turning on a single light. Her perfume still lingered, faint but familiar. When I opened the closet door, I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe the echo of her voice, maybe nothing at all. What I found was a small ledger tucked beneath her folded sweaters. It didn't look special. A plain brown cover, worn along the spine, a faint crease in the middle, like she bent it often. I opened it out of habit, the way you open a letter addressed to you, even when you don't recall the sender. Rows and rows of numbers stared back at me. Dates, amounts, notes, 40 years of entries, all on Thursdays. I traced the ink with my thumb. She always left the house early on Thursdays, saying she needed to take care of a few things. I never questioned it. A marriage lasts longer when you don't poke at every corner, or so I believed. Something shifted in my stomach as I flipped through the pages. I wasn't sure if it was confusion or dread, maybe both. The amounts varied, some small, others large enough to raise a brow. But the pattern never broke. I heard footsteps behind me. Jacob pushed the door open without knocking. He always walked in like that, even when she was alive. She didn't mind. I did, but I let it go. The way I let many things go. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What's that?" he asked. "A ledger," I said. "Your mother kept it." He stepped closer, reaching for it without asking. "You don't need all that old stuff," he muttered. "She kept every receipt like it meant something." I pulled the ledger slightly out of his reach, not much, just enough that he wouldn't grab it. His eyes narrowed for a moment before he smoothed his expression over again. "Dad, what are you doing in here?" he said. "You should get some rest." He spoke as if the room belonged to him, as if my grief needed his permission. "I'm fine," I said. He exhaled sharply, annoyed by an answer that didn't bend toward him. "Just don't get lost digging through her things. It's not healthy." He said it like a warning, or maybe I only heard it that way because something felt wrong.
closed the ledger and placed it gently back on the shelf. My fingers brushed the sweaters she used to fold with such care. She always took her time with small things. Jacob hovered a moment longer, watching me. "You done?" he asked. I nodded. He left without waiting for more. I stood there alone, the door still half open behind him. Something in me felt out of place, misaligned.
I slid the ledger into the crook of my arm, not sure why I needed to hold it, but unable to put it back. I stepped out of the bedroom and pulled the door shut. The click echoed down the hallway. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. I walked through the living room, past the photo she hung on the wall, Jacob in his cap and gown, our daughter Sarah holding a trumpet at her school concert, the three of us at Lake Oconee, with the sun hitting the water just right. Photos preserve the day. They don't preserve the truth. I flipped through the pages again, slower this time. Some entries had short notes beside them, words like settled, Thursday, or sometimes just a small check mark. None of it made sense yet, but something in me tightened when I reached the very first page. January 1984. An amount circled, a name in parentheses I didn't recognize. I tapped the page lightly, as if pressing harder might reveal something hidden underneath. My throat felt dry. I pushed the ledger away and leaned against the counter, my arms folded tight. I had lived my whole life believing I understood my wife. We raised 2 children, fought through layoffs, illnesses, missed payments, broken down cars, and the long nights when she couldn't sleep. She always told me everything, or so I thought. I reached for the ledger again. The front door opened. Jacob's voice traveled through the hallway. "Dad, you still up?" He didn't need anything. He just didn't like leaving me alone with anything he couldn't control. "I'm in the kitchen," I answered. He walked in with the look of a man inspecting his own property. He nodded toward the ledger. "You're not still reading that, are you?" "I'm just looking," I said. He scoffed. "You're making this harder than it has to be." I closed the ledger calmly. "What do you mean?" "You know, going through her stuff, clinging to it. It's been a long week." He spoke as if grief came with an expiration date. I pushed the ledger toward the fruit bowl, half covering it with my hand. "I'll take my time," I said. He watched me again, too closely, too intently. "You should let Sarah help you sort things," he suggested. "She's better at organizing." "I'm fine," I said again. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, then walked out, leaving the faint smell of the cologne he overused. I waited until the house settled before picking up the ledger once more. When I opened it, one detail pulled me in. Every single Thursday entry matched the exact time she used to leave the house. Not a minute early, not a minute late. I flipped pages until I couldn't anymore. The book felt heavier than when I started. I pressed the cover closed. Then I walked out of the kitchen and into the dim hallway, the ledger held tight at my side. My steps slowed as I passed the family photos again. They seemed different now, as if each frame carried a question I hadn't asked. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I paused. Something inside me shifted, a small, precise movement. Not anger, not fear, just understanding. A beginning. I climbed the steps, one hand sliding along the rail, carrying the ledger with me, unsure what I'd find next, but unable to ignore the pull of it. When I reached the bedroom door, I didn't open it. I simply stood there, listening to the quiet press against the walls, and realized, for the first time in years, that the silence I kept wasn't holding anything together anymore. It was erasing me. I left the house earlier than usual, the ledger tucked under my arm. The morning air felt mild, though I barely noticed it while driving toward downtown. Traffic moved slowly along I-20, and every red light gave me another moment to reconsider what I was doing. I kept going anyway. Questions don't answer themselves. The bank sat on a corner I passed 1,000 times. Martha used to say the tellers there were kind, that they treated her well. I stepped inside and joined the short line. Nobody paid attention to me at first. Then one teller, an older woman with silver braids, glanced up. Her face softened in a way that made me think she remembered Martha. But when her eyes dropped to the ledger in my hand, something flickered. She nudged the young man beside her. He followed her gaze, then whispered something behind his palm. Their expressions shifted, recognition, then discomfort, then a kind of guarded politeness people use when they don't want trouble. I moved closer to the counter. The silver-braided woman called me forward. "Mr. Bennett," she greeted quietly. "I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. "My wife came here every Thursday. I'd like to understand these transactions." I placed the ledger on the counter. She hesitated before touching it, almost as if the book carried weight she didn't want to feel. Her fingers traced one of the dates. Then she exchanged another look with the young teller. "Could you give me a moment?" she asked. She disappeared through a side door without waiting for my answer. The young teller kept his head down, tapping at his keyboard even though no customers stood in front of him. A manager walked out next, straightening his tie as he approached. "Mr. Bennett," he said, offering a rehearsed smile. "How can we help you today?" I repeated the same question about the ledger. He listened without blinking, then gestured toward a small seating area off to the side. "Let's talk privately," he suggested. I sat in one of the leather chairs, the ledger resting on my lap. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands folded. "Your wife was a long-standing client," he began. "She handled her own accounts and preferred things kept simple." "I see that," I replied, "but these entries, there's a pattern." He nodded slowly, choosing each word with care. "Yes. She withdrew similar amounts on the same day each week. We respected her routines." "That's not what I'm asking," I said. He leaned back as if giving himself distance. "We're limited in what we can disclose." "Limited?" I echoed. "I'm her husband." His eyes dropped, not out of sympathy, more like he didn't want to hold my gaze. Her instructions regarding certain accounts restricted third-party access. I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. Not from grief, but from the awareness that these people knew more about my wife's Thursdays than I did. Before I could press further, he stood. "If you need statements, we can print them, but some information may remain confidential." He walked away without waiting for my response. I stared at the empty chair he'd left behind. Confidential. As if Martha had lived a separate life between sunrise and noon every Thursday. As if strangers held pieces of her she'd chosen not to share with me. When the teller returned, she handed me a small envelope. "These are the statements you requested," she said gently. "I didn't request them," I replied. "I thought you might want them anyway." I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket. Did my wife ever meet anyone here, outside the bank? Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she masked it. "Sir, we really can't discuss client activity beyond what's printed." "That's not a no," I said quietly. She didn't answer, Instead, she nodded once, slow and heavy, and stepped back behind the counter. I left the bank and walked toward the parking lot, the ledger pressing against my ribs. A faint memory surfaced, Martha stepping into the house each Thursday with a tired smile. I used to ask how her morning went. She always said, "Routine." I unlocked my truck. Before getting in, my phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared. I answered, "Hey, sweetheart." "Dad? Jacob said you've been digging through Mom's things all morning. You should be resting." I leaned against the door. "I'm fine, and just came to the bank." "The bank? Dad, that's a lot for you to handle right now." There it was again, the suggestion that grief made me fragile, that my questions came from confusion, not clarity. "I needed answers," I said. "About what?" she asked, her voice tightening. Mom wasn't hiding anything. I didn't respond immediately. Sarah filled the silence with a shaky breath. "Look, I know it's hard," she continued. "Maybe give it some time. You're still processing everything." "I'm thinking clearly," I told her. "I'm not saying you're not," she replied quickly. "I'm just saying maybe let things settle before you start worrying." Worrying. The word stung more than it should have. "I'll talk to you later," I said. "Dad?" I ended the call gently, not abruptly. I wasn't angry, just aware. I climbed into the truck and rested my hands on the wheel. Cars moved past on the street, people going to work, running errands, living their Thursday the same way as every other week. Life never slows down for grief. It rarely slows for truth either. The envelope rustled when I shifted. I pulled it out and studied the printed statements. Dates matched the ledger, amounts did too. But the recipient column remained blank. I drove toward home, but halfway there, changed direction and headed to the old train station lot behind the bank. One of the places Martha mentioned years ago when she said she liked to walk a bit after errands. I wasn't expecting revelations. I just needed to sit somewhere she once did. The lot looked worn down from years of disuse. Cracked pavement, faded paint, a few birds scattered as my truck rolled in. I parked and rested the ledger on the passenger seat. Someone once said, "Truth lives in the small places we overlook." I wondered if this was one of those places. As I stepped out of the truck, a security guard near the far end lit a cigarette. He squinted in my direction, then started walking toward me. I waited, my hands in my pockets, the morning shifting around us. "Sir," he called out, "you need anything?" His tone wasn't suspicious, just curious. "I'm just looking," I said. "Thought I recognized you," he replied. "Your wife used to come through here." My breath caught, not visibly, but enough that I had to swallow before speaking. "She walked here." He nodded. "Every Thursday. Sometimes she talked to a man near the benches. Quiet fella, didn't stick around long." I glanced at the benches, chipped wood, uneven legs. "You ever hear them talk?" I asked. "Nah, but she always looked tired after, like whatever they said weighed on her." He flicked ash to the ground. "You okay, sir?" I didn't answer. He waited a moment, then walked off, leaving a faint trail of smoke. I returned to the truck and sat there a while, studying the steering wheel as if it could offer direction. The ledger lay beside me, open to a page with a number circled twice. I pressed my thumb against it and exhaled slowly. The guard's words lingered, nudging at something I wasn't ready to name. I started the engine and headed toward home,
the envelope of statements sliding across the seat each time I turned.
When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always did. Yet nothing felt the same. I carried the ledger inside and set it on the kitchen table, intending to review the statements once more. But before I did, my phone buzzed again. Sarah's name appeared a second time. I let it ring while I unfolded the envelope, trying to keep my thoughts from racing ahead of me. The guard's words followed me long after I left the lot. They settled in places I didn't want to examine, quiet corners where doubt likes to grow. I kept telling myself he might have mistaken her for someone else, but the thought wouldn't hold. He described her walk, her habit of clutching her purse strap, the way she paused before speaking. Those details didn't come from a guess. On the drive back, the city almost faded around me. Cars drifted in and out of the lanes. Horns sounded in the distance. Yet everything felt muted. My hands tightened around the steering wheel whenever my mind wandered too far.
I turned onto our street with the kind of hesitation people feel when they're not sure what they're returning to. Inside the house, the quiet returned like an unwelcome companion. I placed the ledger on the dining table and opened the drawer where we kept our essential documents: insurance papers, birth certificates, the will we updated a decade ago. Something felt off. The stack didn't sit the way I remembered. A few folders leaned at odd angles. I checked again, slower this time. 2 envelopes were gone. They weren't misaligned or shuffled. Gone. I stood still, replaying the last few days, trying to recall whether I had moved them myself. Nothing came to mind. Before I could look deeper, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Jacob appeared, wiping his palms on his jeans. "You're home early," he said, glancing at the open drawer. "What are you doing with that stuff?" I stepped aside. "Did you take some papers out of here?" He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Dad, you probably pulled them out and forgot. You've been dealing with a lot." "I didn't forget," he raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This past week hasn't exactly been normal." His tone pushed blame toward my grief again, the same way Sarah's concern had tried to redirect me. I closed the drawer quietly. "I keep things in order," I said. "Nothing gets moved unless someone moves it." Jacob folded his arms. "So you think I'm rifling through your stuff now?" "I didn't say that." "You implied it." He took a step closer, waiting for me to retreat. But I didn't. My stillness annoyed him. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath, then walked toward the living room. "You should stop digging," he called back. "Mum's gone. Let it be." He didn't wait for a response. The conversation slipped away unfinished, leaving the same sharp edge behind it. I returned to the table and pulled the ledger closer.
Every instinct I had, the ones built over decades of supervising crews, managing budgets, catching mistakes before they cost someone a limb, told me something wasn't adding up. That ledger wasn't just a journal. It was a map of decisions she made in silence. I took out my phone and began photographing every page. Not hurried shots, careful ones. I spread the book wide enough to capture the details without damaging the spine. Each click gave me a strange sense of steadiness. If something happened to the ledger, at least a record would remain. The process slowed my breathing. My hands stopped trembling. Routine has a way of calming a person. When I finished, I closed the ledger and held it for a moment. The cover felt different now. No longer just paper and glue, but evidence. I didn't want it sitting in plain sight anymore. Too many things in the house had shifted without my permission. I opened the garage door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of wood, motor oil, and old paint cans grounded me more than any room in the house. I kept a small cabinet against the far wall where I stored things that mattered. Tools, personal letters, small mementos from my father. I slid the ledger into a plastic container, sealed the lid, and placed it behind a box of winter blankets. Not obvious, not hidden beyond reach, just safe. As I pushed the container into place, a faint vibration buzzed in my pocket. My phone again. A message from Sarah this time. "Dad, call me when you can. I want to check on you." I typed back a brief reply. "I'm okay." Before she responded, another thought surfaced, one I tried to ignore at first. If Jacob had gone through the drawer, who else might have tried to access things he shouldn't? And why now, so soon after the funeral? I went back inside and checked the spare keys bowl on the counter. One set was missing. I didn't remember giving it to anyone. Jacob often helped himself to things, telling me afterward as though that excused everything. Maybe he took it, or maybe he took more than that. I sat down at the table again, pulling the printed statements from the envelope. Each line matched the ledger entries exactly. 40 years of withdrawals that led somewhere, to someone. The bank refused to name the recipient, but the pattern itself whispered a direction. A thought crept into my mind, unwelcome but steady. Had I ignored signs for years? Were these routines harmless? Or had I confused comfort for understanding? My phone buzzed once more. A voicemail from Sarah now, her voice gentle but strained. "Dad, please slow down. I don't want you falling into old worries. Mum wouldn't want that." Old worries? I didn't know I had any. I set the phone aside and leaned back in my chair. My eyes moved from the empty drawer to the hallway where Jacob had disappeared earlier. Then to the garage door, now shut tight. A thin line connected everything, though I couldn't see the whole picture yet. The ledger's absence from the kitchen brought a strange calm. Knowing it was tucked away where I could reach it, but where no one would casually stumble on it, gave me space to think. I walked to the sink, filled a glass with water, and took a slow sip. The house remained quiet, the kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like something waiting. Another sip steadied me. A faint car door shut outside, followed by someone's hurried footsteps on the sidewalk. Neighborhood sounds. Everyday life. Yet my chest carried a weight that belonged to something else entirely. I placed the glass on the counter and rested my palms beside it. My eyes drifted toward the living room, where the sunlight fell across the floor in a long, uneven line. I stayed there a moment, listening. Not for noise, but for whatever truth had started to move beneath the surface of my days. Then I turned toward the hallway again, not sure what I expected to find, but drawn by the unmistakable sense that something in my home had already shifted without my agreement. The house had grown still by evening. I'd made myself a simple dinner, rinsed the plate, and sat for a long while at the kitchen table, pretending to read the statements again, though my eyes barely moved across the page. Thoughts drifted from one thing to another. Martha's steady handwriting, the guard's quiet remark, the missing documents. Nothing settled. A sudden bang rattled the garage door. Not a knock, a demand. "Dad, open up. I need to talk to you." The force of it carried through the walls. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of each step as I crossed the kitchen and unlocked the interior door to the garage. Before I could even speak, the outer door shook again. "I'm coming," I called out. When I pulled the garage door open, Jacob stood there, chest heaving as if he'd sprinted from the street. His keys dangled from one hand. He brushed past me without waiting for permission. "Where is it?" he muttered, scanning the shelves. "Where is what?" I closed the door behind him. "That box of Mum's stuff. I need something from it." He strode toward the cabinet I kept pressed against the far wall. Boxes stacked carefully over the years shifted under the force of his tugging. One toppled sideways. He didn't bother lifting it. "That's not yours to dig through," I said. He ignored me, flipping open the plastic bin where I'd stored keepsakes, cards, photos, a few of her journals. His arms plunged inside like he hoped to swallow the contents whole. Paper rustled, envelopes scattered. One slid across the floor near my shoes. "What exactly are you looking for?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He didn't turn. "Mum kept some sensitive documents. I told you that. I need to make sure they're handled." "Handled," I repeated. "They could embarrass the family," he snapped. "You wouldn't want that." He grabbed another stack and rifled through it with an urgency that told me he feared what he might or might not find. I watched his shoulders tighten each time he opened a folder. "If there are sensitive papers," I said, "I should be the one to deal with them." He whipped around. "Dad, you don't understand." His eyes jumped from me to the scattered folders. "Some things can hurt people." "Who?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He bent down, snatched the envelope near my foot and stuffed it into his jacket pocket before I could read the label. "That belongs to your mother," I said quietly. "And now it belongs to the family," he shot back. "I'm protecting us." "From what?" His jaw clenched as if the question offended him. "Just let me take care of this." He reached for another box, shoving aside tools and old rags. Something inside the bin rattled, metal against cardboard. He didn't pause long enough to notice. His movements kept speeding up, growing sharper, more frantic, like he feared running out of time. "You're making a mess," I said. "It doesn't matter." "It does to me." He straightened slowly, chest rising and falling. "Dad, please, this is important. Mum didn't want certain things getting out. I'm respecting her wishes." "You're guessing at her wishes," I replied. "You don't know what she wanted." His eyes hardened. "I know enough." I stepped closer, not threatening, just grounded. "Tell me what you're looking for." He shook his head, brushing past me again toward another storage bin. "It doesn't concern you." "It concerns me if it belonged to my wife." "Mum trusted me," he said sharply. "She told me things she didn't tell you. Let me do what she asked." "She didn't ask you to storm into my garage." He froze, only for a second. Then he swallowed the moment and kept searching. "Jacob," I said, "this isn't how adults solve things." He scoffed, took a step back from the cabinet and wiped dust from his hands. "Adults don't cling to every scrap the way you do." He looked around, at the boxes he'd tipped, the papers he'd scattered, the quiet order he'd broken without apology. "Mum would have wanted this taken care of," he insisted. I'm not the enemy. He reached for another envelope lying half open on the shelf behind me. The motion was too quick, too rehearsed. I put my hand on it first. "What's in here?" I asked. "Give it to me." "It's addressed to your mother." He didn't blink. "She meant for me to have it." "You don't know that." His fingers closed over mine, prying gently at first, then was more pressure. I let go, not from fear, but because I didn't intend to wrestle my own son in a garage at night. He snatched the envelope and shoved it into his jacket alongside the first one. The zipper scraped loudly as he sealed the pocket. "I'll bring it back if it's nothing," he said, though the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. He moved toward the garage door. "You're leaving all this on the floor?" I asked. He paused, glancing over the mess he'd made. "I'll deal with it later." "You won't," I said. He didn't deny it. Instead, he pulled the door open, a gust of cool air sweeping in behind him. "I'm trying to help," he muttered. "You just don't see it." He stepped out before I could reply, letting the door swing shut with a thud that rippled through the room. The quiet afterward felt different, hollow in a way that reached into the walls. Papers lay scattered near the tool bench. A picture frame from Martha's box leaned sideways, the glass unbroken but loose in its hinges. I crouched, gathered a few envelopes, and returned them to their bin. A corner of folded fabric peeked out from under a storage grate. I pulled her old scarf free and set it back where it belonged. My hands kept moving, sorting, closing lids, brushing dust away, not to clean up after him, but to reclaim the space. Each small motion steadied me more than the last. When I stood again, the garage felt colder than it had earlier. The kind of cold that doesn't come from the weather. I reached for the light switch, hesitated, then left the room dim, stepping back into the house with the soft rustle of the door settling behind me. I drove back to the parking lot without telling anyone where I was going. The sun sat higher than the day before, and a few stray leaves drifted across the faded asphalt as I pulled in. The guard who'd spoken to me yesterday leaned against the small booth, sipping something from a metal thermos. He noticed my truck as soon as I turned off the engine. "Back again?" he called out while I walked toward him. "Yeah," I answered. "Got another question." He studied me for a moment, then straightened his shoulders. "Figured you might." I didn't waste time. "Yesterday you mentioned my wife met someone here. How sure are you?" He wiped his hands on his vest. "I'm sure. Saw her nearly every Thursday for years, always parked in that third row." He pointed toward a space where an oil stain shaped like a crooked arrow marked the ground. "She'd wait a few minutes, then a man would show up." "What kind of man?" "Tall, skinny, wore a cap most days, sometimes sunglasses even when it wasn't bright. Never spoke long. They'd stand by the bench over there, just talking. Then he'd walk off toward the alley and she'd head back to her car." I tried to picture it. Her standing here week after week, carrying a burden she didn't share. The guard continued before I could respond. "She always looked heavy afterward. Not sad, just weighed down. You can tell when someone's carrying something alone." He didn't say it with judgment, more like a man who had watched too many stories unfold from a distance. "Did you ever hear them say anything?" I asked. "No, they kept their voices low, but she always held an envelope, every time." The ledger flashed across my mind, the entries, the circling of dates, the repeated sums. I felt something tighten in my throat. He took a slow sip from his thermos. Look, I don't know what it was about. Folks have their reasons. But she never missed a Thursday unless the place flooded or iced over. I thanked him, though the gesture felt small compared to what he'd given me. As I turned to leave, he added, "If you find what you're looking for, I hope it sits easy with you." That stayed with me as I made my way back to the truck, doors shutting in the distance, a delivery van rattling down the side street, the murmur of two coworkers heading into a nearby building. None of it cut through what I'd just learned. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked the screen. Sarah. I answered on the third ring. "Dad, where are you?" she asked. "I came by the house and you weren't there." "Just out running an errand," she hesitated. "Uncle Terry called me. He said Jacob told the family you've been confused since Mum passed." "Dad, why would he say that?" "I suppose he thinks it explains my questions." "Well, they all seem worried, and I'm worried too. You're acting different." "I'm acting curious," I said. "There's a difference." She exhaled, long and uneven. "Dad, please don't let grief twist things around. Jacob said you're digging into old paperwork and imagining problems." "I'm not imagining anything." "I'm not accusing you," she said gently. "I just don't want people misunderstanding your intentions." I didn't answer right away. A pigeon fluttered past, landing on the hood of a nearby car. It hopped twice, pecked at a crumb, then took off. Even that small motion felt clearer than the conversation I was having. "Dad?" "I hear you," I said. "But I need space to look into some things, that's all." "Space is fine. Secrets aren't." Her words weren't sharp, but they held a firmness I recognized. She always tried to mediate, to soften things that were already cracking. I didn't blame her. She didn't know what I knew. "I'll call you later," I said. She wanted to keep talking. I could hear it in the silence. But eventually she said, "All right. Just be careful," and hung up. I stayed in the lot for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel without starting the truck. People walked past now and then, bank employees heading to lunch, a courier wheeling a cart of packages, a group of teenagers cutting through on their way downtown. None of them looked twice at me. Most days that anonymity would have been welcome, but today it felt like being erased. The guard had given me more truth in a few minutes than my own family had offered all week. Everyone else seemed intent on telling me what I felt, what I remembered, what I should let go of. It dawned on me then, not painfully, but with the quiet inevitability of a knot tightening, that I was slipping out of a story that should have been mine to tell. My life, my wife, my home. And yet somehow I'd become a side character in the eyes of my own children. I finally started the truck and backed out of the spot. The steering wheel felt warm beneath my hands as I turned onto the street. Traffic flowed steadily, but the movement outside barely registered. The guard's description replayed in my mind. The hat, the envelopes, the quiet exchanges by the bench. Back home, I parked in the driveway and stayed inside the truck for a minute longer, letting the engine idle while I gathered myself. Then I stepped out, locked the door behind me, and headed inside. The living room looked undisturbed, yet I felt an odd sense of intrusion lingering from the night before. I checked the drawer again, though I didn't expect anything to magically reappear. It hadn't. I carried the printed statements to the table and laid them out beside my phone, organizing them by year. A soft creak sounded somewhere in the house. Pipes settling or wood shifting, I wasn't sure. It pulled my attention for a moment before fading into the background. The statements stared back at me, line after line confirming what I already knew and hinting at what I didn't. I gathered them into a neat stack and pressed my palm over the top. The gesture steadied me, the way tightening a bolt steadies a rattling fixture. Then I rose, picked up the stack, and walked down the hallway toward the room where Martha used to sort her things. Not entirely sure what I expected to find next, but feeling the certainty that whatever answers existed, I would have to uncover them on my own. I drove to the Atlanta Public Library the next morning, choosing a parking spot far from the entrance without thinking much about it. My feet felt heavier than usual as I walked inside. The hum of quiet conversation drifted through the building, but I moved past it toward the archives room, where old records sat forgotten by most people. A staff member led me to a workstation and brought out several boxes once I explained what I needed. "Construction files from 1984, he asked, raising a brow. "That's going back a long way." "Yes," I said. "I'm looking for anything related to a site accident." He nodded and disappeared down the aisle. Moments later, he returned pushing a cart stacked with dusty binders and folders, once stamped with city logos, now faded beyond recognition. "Good luck," he said with a half smile. I thanked him and sat down. My hands moved through paperwork that hadn't been touched in decades. Reports, signatures, faded blueprints, and typed memos from supervisors who'd long retired. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I kept turning pages until something caught my attention. A short incident report dated April 1984. One name stood out in bold. Kowalski, J., Supervising Manager. I whispered the name under my breath. It wasn't familiar, yet something in me tightened when I saw it. The report described a fall on site. A worker had slipped from scaffolding. Minor injuries, it said, though the notes implied something more complicated. Beside the signature line, another handwriting appeared. Smaller, careful strokes. It belonged to Martha. She had initialed the page as a witness. My thumb brushed over her initials. She had mentioned a fall once, years ago, but never said she played a role in reporting it. She certainly never mentioned Kowalski. I kept going through the file, finding additional documents tied to the same name. He signed off on compensation forms, safety inspections, and follow-up evaluations. Everything pointed toward a man who maintained authority over that site and over my wife's early career. The more I uncovered, the more connections formed behind my eyes. Not answers, just lines waiting to be drawn together. I took out the notebook I'd brought and copied down names, dates, page references. Then I pulled a USB from my pocket and scanned each relevant document into the system. The familiar rhythm of saving files steadied me. Something about gathering information always had a calming effect, almost like repairing a tool. You don't need the full blueprint, just enough pieces to see the shape of the thing. My hands didn't rush. Every movement had intention behind it. An archivist walked past and paused by my table. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Just trying to understand something old." "Aren't we all?" he replied and walked off. Once finished, I organized the digital copies into folders labeled by year. The USB felt warm in my palm, heavy with things that didn't make sense yet. I pushed my chair back and stood, joints protesting from sitting too long. Blowing out a slow breath, I returned the binders to the cart and gave the staff a nod before leaving. Outside, the brightness made me blink. I walked across the library steps and down toward my truck, noticing a car parked 2 spaces away. A dark sedan. Its engine idled softly. At first, I thought nothing of it. People waited for friends or made long phone calls from their vehicles all the time. Still, something about the stillness inside the car unsettled me. The windows were tinted, and the driver didn't move. I unlocked my truck and climbed in. The sedan remained in place. When I pulled out of the lot, it rolled forward a beat after me. Maybe coincidence? Maybe not. I turned right onto the main road. So did the sedan. My fingers tightened on the wheel. I switched lanes and took a side street toward a residential neighborhood I didn't usually pass through. The sedan turned again, keeping its distance. I slowed at a four-way stop and watched the rear-view mirror. The car paused longer than necessary, hesitating as though waiting for something. Just before I could react further, another vehicle approached from the cross street. The sedan seized the moment, swung left, and disappeared around the corner. My shoulders eased, though my thoughts didn't. It could have been nothing. Someone lost, someone driving cautiously. Yet my gut stirred with the familiar warning that comes when the pieces of a puzzle begin lining up in ways you don't understand. I continued home, replaying documents in my mind. Kowalski's name, the accident, my wife's signature, the guard's quiet account of her meetings. I parked in the driveway and turned off the engine. The neighborhood looked unchanged. Lawns trimmed, trash cans rolling back from the curb. A boy riding a bike too fast down the sidewalk. Ordinary life carried on, even when yours didn't feel ordinary anymore. Inside the house, I placed the USB on the dining table and opened my notebook. Lines I'd written in the library stared back at me. I traced a circle around the supervisor's name, then underlined the date of the accident. Memories of old conversations nudged their way forward. Martha mentioning a rough month at work long ago. The time she stayed late 3 days straight. The quiet way she handled stress without sharing the full weight of it. My pen hovered, then moved again, adding arrows, small notes, a timeline that stretched further than I expected. Through the window, a neighbour pulled into his driveway with bags of groceries. Someone waved from across the street. Life continued its steady hum. I leaned back, rubbed the bridge of my nose and let my gaze drift to the hallway. The house felt quieter than usual, though maybe I was imagining that. Maybe the quiet had always been there and I was only now listening. The USB sat near my elbow. I reached for it, intending to slide it into the notebook pocket, but instead kept it in my hand a moment longer, feeling its smooth edges press against my skin. Then I rose from the chair, walked toward the kitchen, and filled the glass with water, letting the steady rhythm from the faucet settle my thoughts before I took a sip and looked back toward the table. I walked back into the house, still carrying the faint tension from that sedan that had slipped away at the corner. I didn't talk about it, didn't write it down. I just felt it settle somewhere low in my stomach. I set my keys on the counter and reached for a glass when my phone buzzed twice. A notification from the bank. I opened it, expecting some routine update. Instead, a bold message stared back at me. Your secondary account has been temporarily restricted due to a verification request submitted by a family member. I reread the line, slower the second time. Restricted. Verification. Family member. Before I could call the bank, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Jacob appeared, leaning against the doorway like he owned the frame. "You got the alert?" he asked. I kept my voice steady. "What did you do?" "Relax," he said, waving a hand. "I submitted a safety request. You've been distracted lately. I don't want anything slipping through the cracks." "It's my account," I said. "It's still linked to the house," he cantered, "and to bills, and to everything Mum handled. I'm just making sure nothing gets mismanaged." I set the phone down. "Without asking me?" He shrugged. "Dad, you're digging into paperwork that doesn't matter. Old construction reports, bank ledgers from the 80s. This isn't like you." "You don't know what's like me." He stepped into the kitchen and lowered his voice. "I know you're hurting. I get it. But chasing these things isn't helping. Mum didn't want you stressing over that stuff. I'm trying to keep everything stable." "Stable for who?" The question landed harder than I intended. His jaw twitched. "For the family," he said. "For you." I pulled out a chair and sat, needing the support even if I wouldn't admit it. "You should have talked to me first." "I tried," he insisted. "You're shutting me out." "I'm thinking," I corrected. "You're overthinking." He said it like a verdict, not an observation. I rose again, unwilling to feel cornered in my own kitchen. My steps carried me toward the hallway. The walls seemed closer than before, like someone had inched them inward overnight. I could feel Jacob behind me, not touching, not speaking, but following with the ease of someone who believed he had the right to. "I'll call the bank myself," I said without turning. "Don't make this harder," he replied. "It's my account," I repeated. His response came quicker than his breath. "And you're not acting like someone who should be handling accounts right now." I stopped walking. The quiet that filled the space wasn't peaceful. It carried weight, expectation. I didn't let it root me. My hand rested on the garage door handle. Jacob said behind me, "Look, Dad, digging into the past won't help anyone. Mum kept some things private. Respect it. Stop dragging this out." I opened the door and stepped into the dim garage before he could say more. The cool air inside wrapped around me. I didn't flip on the light. Instead, I stood in the dark with the faint outline of the shelving units barely visible. My breath left me slowly, as if it needed permission. The banking notification replayed in my mind, looping until the words lost shape and became something heavier. Restricted. Verification. Family member. I leaned against the workbench, palm pressed to the wood. My hand trembled, not from age, not from fear, but from the sharp recognition of something I hadn't named until now. The shrinking of my world, piece by piece. A drawer emptied, an envelope taken. A garage rummaged through, a bank account restricted. Not chaos, not accident, a pattern. My hand steadied itself after a moment, fingers tightening around the edge of the bench. The tremor in my wrist eased, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt since the funeral. Jacob's voice drifted faintly from the kitchen, muffled, impatient. Maybe on the phone with someone else. The words didn't matter. The tone did. He wasn't protecting me. He was containing me. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the truth sharpen rather than soften. I breathed once, then again, slower. Thoughts aligned themselves the way tools clicked into place in an organized drawer. In the far corner of the garage, a spider thread glimmered in the faint light drifting through the window. Dust gathered on the floor where boxes had sat undisturbed. It looked like a room untouched, yet it held the weight of everything that had changed. I walked to the plastic bin I'd used to hide the ledger, checking the placement without opening it. Still there, still safe. The only thing that hadn't been pulled out of my hands yet. My fingers brushed the lid before dropping to my side. The garage door to the house opened a crack. "You okay out here?" Jacob asked. "I needed air," I replied. He hesitated. "Don't make this complicated." I didn't answer. He lingered another second, then closed the door. The garage fell quiet again. Not hollow this time. Not cold. Just clear. I stood a little straighter, then reached for the switch, not to turn on the light, but to leave the room exactly as it was while I walked back toward the kitchen, thoughts gathering with each step. The phone rang early, cutting through the quiet like someone tapping a shoulder you didn't offer. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something nudged me to answer. "Mr. Bennett?" a man asked. "You probably don't remember me. Name's Dorsey. I worked with your wife back in the 80s. Construction site on Marietta Street." I gripped the back of a chair. I remember that site. "Well, our old supervisor, Kowalski, passed last month. His daughter's been sorting his things and she found an envelope addressed to your wife. Looks like he meant to send it years ago." The words settled before I could respond. "I can bring it by," he added. "You should see it yourself." I told him I'd be home. When the call ended, my fingers hovered over the table for a long moment before I pulled out a chair and waited. Dorsey arrived 20 minutes later. He handed me a thin folder that looked older than its contents should have allowed. The flap had dried glue flaking off the edges. Inside was a single photocopy, yellowed, uneven, as if someone had run it through a dyeing machine. "Found this inside," he said. "Looks like a letter." "You read it?" I asked. "No, sir, not my business. But Kowalski must have kept it for a reason." He left without lingering. I sat down and unfolded the paper. The letter wasn't typed. It was handwritten. Slanted strokes, rushed pacing, occasional smudges. A demand for money, weekly, under a threat I couldn't yet connect. But the handwriting, the numbers, the spacing. Not Martha's, not Kowalski's. I leaned closer. The figure 8 had a sharp bend at the top. The number 3 tapered like a hook. The 0 dipped on its right side. I'd seen those quirks 1,000 times, on sticky notes, chore lists, signatures scribbled on grocery receipts. Jacob's handwriting. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from the strange clarity that often comes before a storm. I traced the lines once more, following the familiar quirks that belonged to the son who claimed he was protecting me. The letter had no greeting, no sign-off, just an amount circled twice. $800. The same amount circled in the earliest ledger entries. I folded the paper and pressed it flat. The room felt smaller, as if the corners had crept inward while I read. I didn't look away from the page until the knock sounded at the door. Not loud, but persistent. I opened it to find Jacob standing on the porch, wearing the kind of smile people practice in mirrors. "Dad," he said warmly, "I've been thinking about our talk yesterday. I know things have been tense. I wanted to check on you." His tone coated everything in sugar, yet left a strange aftertaste. "I'm fine," I replied. Good.
He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I brought some paperwork, nothing major, just something to help with the finances until things settle. He handed me a folder, too new, too crisp compared to the one Dorsey had given me. I didn't open it. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. "Just the simple authorization form," he said, waving a hand casually. "It lets me manage your accounts temporarily, so you don't have to stress about bills or security stuff."
"So you can access whatever you've already restricted?" I asked. His smile flickered, then returned, stretched tighter this time. "Dad, come on. This is practical. You're juggling too much right now. Sarah agrees." "Does she?" I asked. "Well, she trusts my judgment, and you know I've always handled the money side of things well." I nearly laughed at that, though nothing about the moment felt amusing. He nudged the folder toward me again. "Just sign at the bottom. It's straightforward." The gesture reminded me of the garage, him grabbing envelopes without permission, digging through my wife's belongings like he owned the air in the room. Today he wore concern like a costume. "You're pushing this awfully hard," I said. "It's not pushing," he insisted. "It's helping. I'm trying to make your life easier." His voice had softened, but his eyes hadn't. I placed the unsigned folder on the table. "What's really going on, Jacob?" He blinked once, slow, calculating. "I told you, I'm protecting the family." "From what?" I asked. He exhaled, annoyed that I wasn't swallowing the rehearsed lines. "Dad, you're chasing ghosts. All these old files and letters, you're misunderstanding things Mum left behind." My hand rested on the back of the chair. His gaze drifted past me toward the hallway, as if looking for signs of what I'd discovered. "Where were you earlier?" he asked suddenly. "Out," I said. He shifted his weight. "Doing what?" "I don't owe you that answer." Something flickered in his posture. Surprise, irritation, maybe both. He reached for the folder again, tapping it with 2 fingers. "Just sign it," he said, gentler but tighter. "We can avoid problems if you let me take care of things." I didn't touch the pen. He watched me for a long beat, the warmth draining from his expression until nothing soft remained. "You're making things complicated," he said. "Not as complicated as forging a letter," I replied. The words slipped out before I meant them to. His eyelids fluttered in a fast, involuntary blink. "What letter?" "I think you know which one." He swallowed, throat tightening for a brief moment. "You're confused," he said. "You're mixing things up. You shouldn't be making accusations." I picked up the photocopy from the table, slowly, deliberately. His eyes followed the page like a predator waiting for movement. "You wrote this," I said. His jaw locked. "No, I didn't." "The numbers are yours. The curves, the spacing." "That's ridiculous," he said, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. Silence stretched between us, not the kind that asks for understanding, but the kind that reveals truth more loudly than shouting ever could. I folded the photocopy and slipped it into the pocket of my shirt. Jacob stepped back, sensing the shift he could no longer control. "I should go," he muttered. "We'll talk later." He left quicker than he arrived, barely pulling the door fully closed behind him. His footsteps thudded down the porch steps, then faded. When the house settled again, I walked back to the table. The unsigned authorization form lay open, waiting. I closed the folder, slid it aside, and rested my hand over the pocket holding the letter. The piece that completed the pattern I'd been gathering for days. Everything I hadn't wanted to see now sat in front of me, unmistakable. The line connecting each clue was no longer faint. It ran straight through my home, into my marriage, and back through the 40 years my wife walked to a bank every Thursday. I pulled in a slow breath, steady enough to hold, and let it out as I reached for the notebook on the far end of the table. I carried the folder and the ledger into the living room without announcing anything. The house felt unusually still, as if the walls themselves were waiting. I set each item on the coffee table. Ledger on the left, photocopied letter in the middle, the old printed still from the worn security camera on the right. The arrangement wasn't planned. It simply happened the moment my hands let go. Jacob wandered in a minute later, pretending he hadn't been hovering close enough to hear every step I made. "Dad, you wanted to talk?" he asked, sounding cautious, though he tried to hide it under a relaxed tone. I gestured toward the table. "Sit." He lowered himself onto the couch with a practiced sigh, like he was about to endure another one of my episodes. His eyes drifted toward the documents, and a tiny muscle under his left eye twitched. "What is all this?" he asked. "You tell me," I replied. He picked up the ledger first. "Mum handled these. Why are we doing this again?" I tapped the photocopy. "Start with that one." He hesitated before pulling the page closer. His throat bobbed when he recognized the rough, uneven handwriting. He skimmed the threats, the demands for money, the weekly instructions, then the circled amounts. He placed the sheet down with exaggerated calm. "Okay, what exactly are you suggesting?" I didn't answer. I just waited. His composure thinned. The pitch of his voice shifted. "You think I wrote that? Seriously?" I kept my gaze steady. "I was a kid in '84, he snapped. "Why would I write?" "I didn't say you wrote it in 1984. That froze him. He didn't blink for almost a full second. "You forged it recently," I continued, "to make it look like Mum was paying off Kowalski. You counted on me not knowing the difference between her handwriting and yours." "That's insane," he said, laugh sharp and forced. "You're seeing patterns where there aren't any." I reached for the still image printed from the ancient camera system tucked in the bank's parking lot archive. Hard to make out details, but not impossible. 2 figures, an exchange. The same cap the guard had described. "Is this supposed to be proof?" he scoffed. "Could be anybody." "But you knew it existed," I said quietly. He stiffened. "No, I didn't. You mentioned it last week, the day you tore through the garage." His lips parted, but no words came out. I placed the ledger in front of him again, flipping to the early pages. "Look at the deposits Martha made. Look at the Thursdays she never missed. $800 over and over for 40 years. He swallowed hard, eyes darting across the rows. "You knew she was going every Thursday," I said. "You knew she kept it private. You took advantage of that after she died." "That's not. Dad, listen. Mom didn't want you dealing with... Don't talk about what your mother wanted." His mouth snapped shut. Something wild flickered in his eyes, as if he had lost track of which tactic he was supposed to use next. He reached for sympathy. "Dad, I'm doing my best. I'm trying to keep things from falling apart." "You're grieving, and you're confused. and you're blaming me for things that just aren't real. You forged a letter, I repeated, slower this time. You filed a request with the bank to restrict my account. You tried to get me to sign over financial control. And you lied to your sister about my state of mind. He bristled. I told her the truth. You are slipping. You broke into my garage, I said. You took a sealed envelope from your mother's box. That envelope had things that could hurt us, he burst out. You don't understand how reputation works. People look at us differently when they think we're weak. Whose reputation? I asked. He pushed off the couch and began pacing, running a hand through his hair. Dad, do you know what people in this neighborhood already say about our family? About how you handled money? About how Mum had to... I raised my hand, and he froze mid-sentence. Finish it, I said. Go on. He shook his head, avoiding my eyes. Forget it. No, I insisted. Say it. He stared at the floor as if it could shield him. People think you were irresponsible, Dad, that Mom covered your mistakes for years. That's why I stepped in. I'm trying to protect the family name. I sat back. By stealing, by lying, by rewriting her life? His voice cracked at the edges. I wasn't stealing, I was... Look, the money Mom gave, whoever, it doesn't matter now. What matters is keeping things stable. You need someone to take charge. And that someone is you? Who else? He demanded. Sarah? She's barely around. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who knows how everything works. That house is practically in my name already. The last sentence slipped out too easily, too practiced. I opened the second folder I'd kept hidden behind me. Jacob's face lost color. Inside were the request forms he had filed, guardianship inquiries, financial oversight petitions, the early stages of what amounted to legal control over my decisions. I placed them gently on the table. You were preparing to declare me incompetent, I said. He didn't deny it, not truly. He just reached for desperation. Dad, please. I thought you needed help. You thought you could take everything before I realized something was wrong. He knelt suddenly, grabbing the edge of my chair, eyes glistening with a forced sheen. I was scared, okay? Scared of losing everything Mom built. Scared of you making mistakes. I didn't want to hurt you. His hands trembled. His breath hitched. Tears welled. I watched him quietly, letting him empty himself of every manipulative tactic he'd ever relied on. After a long pause, he shifted again, flicking from pleading to bitterness. This is your fault, you know. You never paid attention to finances. Mom did everything. Someone had to take over. Someone, I echoed. He wiped his face roughly and glared. Dad, sign the papers. Let me handle this. If you don't, this will get ugly. The family will look at you differently. You don't want that. Jacob, I said calmly. He waited. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photocopied letter, the one he forged, and slid it toward him. You threatened your own mother, I said, and you kept her paying. His breath caught, then stuttered to a stop. Every argument he might have used crumbled behind his lips. He didn't speak again. I stood, leaving the documents on the table. My knees cracked softly as I rose, not with weakness, but with the weight of truth settling exactly where it needed to. Jacob remained kneeling, hollowed out by a reality he could no longer rearrange. I walked past him without touching his shoulder. In the hallway, a faint draft moved through the house, quiet, shifting, familiar in its honesty. I kept walking until the living room slipped out of sight behind me. The courtroom felt colder than the morning outside. though I couldn't decide if it came from the air conditioning or the quiet murmur of people waiting to hear a family fall apart. I sat at the petitioner's table with a folder resting against my knee and the USB drive tucked safely in my jacket pocket. Sarah slid into the seat beside me without speaking. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, steady in a way mine hadn't been for weeks. The judge entered and everyone rose. When we sat again, I placed the USB on the table. The clerk collected it, along with the envelope containing the original letter and my written statement. The ledger copies were already in the court file. Everything I had spent nights organizing, every notation, every date, every small attempt to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things, now sat in front of people who had no stake in the outcome. The prosecutor began with the simplest piece, the forged letter. Hearing it read aloud stripped away the fog of doubt that had followed me for so long. Each phrase landed without ceremony. The weekly threats, the demanded amounts, the handwriting comparison. Then came the financial records, the Thursday withdrawals, the matching sums, the years of quiet deception. Jacob shifted in his chair at the respondent's table. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering something urgent. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tight the tendons showed through his skin. For the first time, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not younger, just diminished. When the security footage from the bank lot was displayed, he raised a hand, as if the gesture alone could push the evidence back into the envelope it came from. His attorney objected to its clarity. The judge allowed it anyway. Next came Dorsey's testimony. The old construction worker stepped up with his hat in his hands, speaking plainly about the envelope he'd delivered. He described Kowalski's declining memory and the notes found among his belongings. He didn't embellish anything. He simply told what he'd seen and what he'd done. Some truths don't need dressing. The prosecutor rested the case. The courtroom turned to Jacob. His lawyer tried to argue confusion, stress, grief, clerical error, every path except the truth. Then Jacob stood to speak for himself. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't acknowledge the forged signature requests or the guardianship inquiry he'd filed behind my back. He spoke in circles, claiming he'd been trying to stabilize the household, a phrase that rang hollow even before he repeated it twice more. The judge stopped him. "Mr. Bennett, this is not a matter of family disagreement. These are criminal acts supported by documented evidence." A heavy pause followed. Sarah glanced at me, though I didn't turn. My attention stayed fixed on the judge's bench, the one place in the room untouched by excuses, guilt, or sentiment. The ruling was brief but final. Forgery, financial fraud, attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult, interference with protected assets. A deputy approached Jacob as the cuffs were secured around his wrists. He stared at the floor, shoulders rigid, mouth pressed into a line that once signaled stubbornness, but now signaled defeat. He didn't look my way. I didn't expect him to. I hadn't looked at him since the hearing began. The moment the gavel struck, a soft murmur spread through the room. Someone behind us exhaled. Someone else shifted their purse. Ordinary sounds in an extraordinary moment. I rose slowly. My knees felt steadier than they had in months. Outside the courthouse, the air cut through my coat with a thin edge, but it didn't unsettle me. I paused at the top step, letting the chill settle on my face. Cars rolled past on Prior Street. A bus chugged to a stop across the intersection. Life continued, indifferently and without ceremony. Sarah came to stand beside me. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I stepped down the first stair, then another, feeling each one beneath the weight of my foot. Something inside me eased with every movement, not triumph, not relief, but the quiet recognition that a long-held burden no longer belonged to me. Halfway down, I stopped to adjust my collar against the wind. My fingers didn't shake this time. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky held itself back. I kept walking until the courthouse doors disappeared behind me, leaving nothing but the sound of traffic and the steady rhythm of my own steps guiding me forward.